You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with a Business Unlimited smartphone plan. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second internet plan with savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Now streaming on Peacock.
By all that's holy, Bridget Jones.
Hello, old friend.
Bridget Jones is back
We are about to embark on an adventure.
for one final chapter.
Anything else I can help with?
Yes.
Experience every moment
Do you think about what might have been?
and fall in love
To Bridget.
all over again.
It's time to live.
Bridget Jones, Mad About the Boy. Streaming now only on Peacock.
Thanks so much for joining me here on the program. It is great to be with you again this week. Yesterday was the Super Bowl. I think this is going to air 2 days after the Super Bowl, so please forgive me. I'm recording it in the evening. I have this bit on Facebook that I honestly almost forgot about until I think it was Dave Snyder in the We're Libertarians fans Facebook group reminded me to do it. But the thing is, every Super Bowl, I noticed this trend like 10, 15 years ago, that every Super Bowl halftime, people hate it before it even, it's just from the beginning of Facebook 20 years ago, the halftime show has been widely panned by the little brain critics on Facebook. And it just has been this thing that the second anybody got a Facebook account, they had to get on there and talk about how bad the halftime show was. I've never seen anybody explain what a good halftime show is. Like Michael Jackson, people who were born in 1994 are talking about how Michael Jackson had the greatest halftime show ever. Like you were alive. I don't remember. I was in peak TV watching age here at 41, and I don't remember Michael Jackson. He was the first halftime show back in, I think, 92. The way that the halftime show used to be like marching bands from the local area and up with people and like really bad entertainment. And they didn't really, I don't even know if they showed it on the broadcast or not. But in 91 or 92, In Living Color over on Fox counter-programmed the Super Bowl. They said, hey, during halftime of the Super Bowl, switch from ABC or CBS or whatever it was on and come over to Fox and watch the Super Bowl halftime show. And In Living Color created the halftime show. So it's sort of funny now that like every halftime show, because Jay-Z's entertainment company programs the halftime show for Apple Music, and I think Dr. Dre may have something to do with that. It's usually like Kendrick Lamar, a rap artist, or The Weeknd, or the first year they did it, it was a medley of artists in 21. And it's like, that's terrible. But from the very beginning, it's had, how shall we say, an urban flavor. That was the genesis of the creation of the halftime show. But every year we have to endure the opinions from the small-minded critics who talk about how bad the halftime show is. It's so boring and so boomery every year. And I think over the decade that I've been ranting about this on Facebook, I think I have turned into probably too pro halftime show, but I generally don't care. Like I really did enjoy Kendrick Lamar's. I thought it was really good. I did not care for Rihanna's. I think she was last year. No, I think Usher was last year and Rihanna was the year before that, maybe. I don't really remember Usher's. I remember not liking Rihanna's. But I really liked Kendrick Lamar's. I like Kendrick Lamar. I thought it was the most badass move to ever look in the camera and risk a lawsuit from Drake and say, hey, Drake, I heard you like him young. I thought that was fantastic. Like having Samuel L. Jackson as the voice of basically playing his Django character saying, don't get too ghetto, don't get too out of control. Like that's what we hear every year on Facebook from people. this is just a little too black is really what people are saying. They don't say it that expressly, but that's what they mean, right? They want, we had the Who do the halftime show and it was so boring. And I love the Who. Like if I'm picking up my Spotify and turning on music, I'm turning on the Who probably before Kendrick Lamar. But like these guys are all in their 80s. They look like Angela Lansbury. They move like it too. It's just sort of that era is over. Foreigner is not going to come back and do the halftime show and be entertaining. It's just not how it works anymore. Like the Apple Music who puts on the halftime show wants to get streams. They want people to sign up for Apple Music. They're not going to get that opportunity with people in their 50s and 60s. The people who will sign up for Apple Music generally tend to be younger people, right? So they are choosing entertainment that helps their bottom line. That's the point of all this. But I think the conversation drives me nuts. I think not only because it's just often racially tone deaf by people, and that's not really even the point of this podcast. We'll get into that probably on the pat down later. I think what bothers me from a political perspective is the lack of tolerance for pluralism. Okay. There is such a stronger push now than a decade ago when I started this comedic bit that I have just now, like, it's become a thing. People understand, like Brian Nichols repeating, it's not for me. I understand, because I've said that so many times, which has kind of been the point. Just pointing out that, like, not everything has to be for me. Like, I am a Christian suburban leaning, like, white guy who's straight, who's married with kids. Like, I'm 41. It's kind of over for me. Like, the cool train has left the station. I got lunch with the Gen Z kids in the office on Friday. I don't think they thought I was cool. Those days are never coming back. I'll never be as cool as I used to be, like when I started this podcast, which is really sad, to be honest. But that train has left the station. And I'm no longer really, I guess maybe I should be the target audience for an Apple, because I am like a techie person and I do have expendable income at this point in my life. But I recognize that, like, my tastes are weird and I'm probably not going to, like, the person I was most excited to see yesterday was Trombone Shorty. Like, if you were having a bad day, you put on Trombone Shorty, play some New Orleans jazz, you're going to have the best time of your life. What's the New Orleans Preservation Hall? I think it's Preservation Hall, like, just the most fun music you will ever have. But I thought it was so cool to have Lauren Daigle, a Christian artist, with Trombone Shorty, who I love. Like, just spectacular. They did a great job, a great rendition. I liked the Star Spangled Banner. I thought it was different and unique. There was, towards the end, it like floated into not being the Star Spangled Banner, but I'm not a purist on that. I still think Chris What's-His-Face last year, Stapleton, had the best. That I think, other than Whitney Houston, is my favorite national anthem ever. But I thought this was cool. Like, it's contextual, right? They're in New Orleans, and of course you're going to have some New Orleans flavor to it, and that's fine. It doesn't matter to me. And I think that's the bottom line, is I don't understand why any of this matters so much to people. Like, just watch the Super Bowl, and if it's not for you, I don't care about the Philadelphia Eagles winning. I don't care if the Chiefs win. I don't care if somebody sings the national anthem well or not. I don't care if the halftime show is good. Like, none of it matters to me. And I have never understood why people feel the need for it to matter to them so much. Why so many people feel they need to be catered to. And if they're not catered to, then it's a problem. It's borderline oppressive for some of these people. That's what I don't get. I mean, doing the pat down, I have had such a strong education in, like, understanding, like, the world I grew up in Plainfield. When you grow up in Plainfield, Indiana, where it's 98% white, everybody's Republican, everybody's Christian, like everybody thinks like you, looks like you. I went back and hosted the Plainfield Hall of Fame award ceremony last weekend. And it was such a reminder of, it was a great place to grow up. It's an awesome town. How lucky I was to grow up in a Mayberry-like setting in so many ways. But it was very like monoculture. Like there wasn't a lot of difference, and you sort of are given these goggles where you put on the world and your worldview is one way. And society has programmed media in a lot of ways to cater to people like me. And Kendrick Lamar's show was not for me. I liked it. I got the subtext. I don't think I would have felt that way if it hadn't been for the pat down experience that I've had, and the black friends that I have made along the way. But I have a better appreciation for the subtext of that and the artistry that went into that, and the subtle messages and not inside jokes necessarily. I guess inside jokes really, like having Serena Williams there is an inside joke that like I didn't get at first, but now like understand. And Brian Wolgemuth was saying, well, you shouldn't need a study guide for a halftime show. It just should be as broad and as likable by everyone as possible. Okay, that may be a fair point, but I also don't think that really is going to exist moving forward. Like when probably half the people listening to this right now have no idea who Mr. Beast is. Mr. Beast is arguably the biggest television personality in the world right now, maybe in the history of TV. Right now, now he is on Prime now with a TV show, but me and my daughter watch Mr. Beast almost every single night. And we watch it on television. We just watch it through the YouTube app. And these videos have 300 to 500 million views. Like, show me another television show, including the Super Bowl, that has that kind of view count. But he has his own ecosystem that many of you may have never heard of before, right? He has this, he speaks to her generation, like Minecraft and gaming and video games and little weird Japanese cartoons. Like, I don't get half of it. It's not for me. It's just enough for me and enough for her that we can find common ground on it. I think that's why Kendrick Lamar was a bold choice, is he wasn't trying to find common ground with anybody. The point of the halftime show was basically to say, like, black culture is enduring. It has created America, that the flag was made up of black men because the subtle message was America was built on black labor. And you had Samuel L. Jackson reprising his Django role, saying, you need to not be so, you need to appeal to the blah, and him saying, it's the right time and the wrong guy. I'm not that guy. So, it was interesting to see something that wasn't trying to be broad at all, even at certain points, specifically programmed to just Drake, right? Like programmed to one person as opposed to the broad specter of the culture. And I think I look at that and go, okay, it's not for me. I'm not that target audience. It's provocative, possibly to try to evoke some emotion from your typical like average white guy. But I feel like that, to me, the way that I process that is like, oh, this is interesting information to take in, as opposed to this is pissing me off because I don't understand it, so I'm mad at it. Or I understand it and I'm even more mad at it. Which it's always funny to see who comments on my stuff, because like I know who the actual racists are on my comments. It's nobody that you would know or recognize or anything. So don't go like looking, trying and hunting for it. But like, I know good and well why they didn't like that. And it is because of race. And it is because they think of the white culture needing to be protected from black culture, right? And then there are people who, like, their default setting is white culture and they don't like anything that is black culture. And then there are people who are just indifferent. And then there are people, I don't know. So I'm getting a phone call here. But the bottom line is, I look at it like we're moving into a period where you're going to have more and more of these complex, interesting moments where there isn't a monoculture anymore. There isn't one single culture that the 3 television shows tried to program and they're gatekeepers to culture. Like that, those days are over. There are many different cultures that are going to move in. It's not even just a racial thing. Like Harry and I have 2 completely different cultures. And it's not because Harry is black. It is because Harry likes waifus. I don't understand anything Harry is into. He talks about yoga, and that's his part of his culture. Like it's sort of, you get to create your own little elements of culture now. In terms of what you find to be entertainment, right? Culture contains many different pieces. Morals, values, ethics. But I think entertainment is a huge piece of that and what we tend to think of, and that's the context of this discussion. But are we going to adopt an attitude where we look at these things and go, all right, it's not for me, but America is a really big place and can endure a bunch of different messages and a bunch of different thoughts and an open-minded attitude towards other people's enjoyments? Or are we going to have this closed-off attitude of, it's not for me, I hate it, I'm against it, if it's not what I like, then it's bad? And I think it's a choice, especially as you get older and things become more confusing. I think we see this with our parents, how much more closed-minded our parents are than maybe when, those of us who are like 40 and our parents are in their 60s, 70s. They're a lot more closed-minded than they were when they were our age. So I just tend to look at it like I want to adopt something, a little more of an open attitude towards things. I don't think that makes me a better person. I mean, I understand why you would think that, but it's not, I don't intend that. I mean, but if you see me that way, it's totally fine. So let's talk a little bit about the rule of law. I'm trying not to intentionally program the show to be anti-Trump. I have always been anti-Trump. If you go back and listen to shows from 2015, 2016, where I had just read Mike Duncan's book on the fall of Rome, and I called Trump the Gracchi brothers, I think I've been pretty borne out by that conversation about how he will fundamentally transform the nation's norms, the unwritten rules of how society works, how politics works, and once that genie is uncorked, you can't get it back. We've talked about that consistently for 10 years. We're going to keep talking about that because it's just fundamentally true. And you need to be aware of that to know where we're headed and choose if you want to head that direction or not. So, but I also don't want to just spend 4 years, isn't Trump bad and being awful, because I just think that's kind of fundamentally boring. And like predictable. And I don't want to be predictable and boring, like just posting about how the halftime show sucks. So we're going to talk about the January 6th protester pardon by Trump. We're going to talk about the Joe Biden pardon of his family. We're going to talk about the pardon powers, all with Addison Hosner, who is the COO of Young Voices. You hear Young Voices a lot here on the show. It's a lot. It's like it's like a libertarian newswire. And they offer up interviews to radio shows, television shows. Brad Palumbo, Hannah Cox, I think, was in it. Brad Palumbo definitely was. Caleb Franz, who you've heard here on the network, he was a part of it. Alexandra Hudson, who's a friend of mine, she was an early member of Young Voices. But basically, it's this program that helps young writers get their start and helps get their feet going, helps place them in magazines, newspapers, radio outlets, TV outlets, gives them training along the way to teach them how to communicate libertarian ideas. And I get their emails, and there are a lot of times, like with Addison's email where I go, yeah, I want to talk to him about that. And Addison is a really smart, intelligent guy. We've had him on before, maybe the most handsome guest that we've ever had on the Chris Spangle show. He has like two master's degrees from a Creighton Law School. I think that's what I read. He's just an incredibly smart guy, and I think he gives such a great explanation of the rule of law and why the January 6th pardons were a problem from a precedent and constitutional point of view, from a process point of view, and also from a moral point of view. And we also touch on Joe Biden and what he did, because he pardoned more people than any president in history, right? So, Trump pardons 1,500 people. That's still like 1/6 of the people that Joe Biden pardoned. So we talk about why, what he did, what this all means for the future of the republic. So here's my conversation with Addison Hosner. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. Addison Hosner, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Chris. Well, glad to be here.
Yeah. Every time I talk to a Young Voices contributor, it's always a great time, even though usually it's for really messed up reasons. So, some politician somewhere is doing something that isn't good for the Constitution, that isn't good for liberty, usually. And this is sadly no exception. And I think this is kind of a long parade of podcasts that I'm doing here in the beginning of the Trump administration that highlights some of the ways that the executive branch is, well, just trying to suck up more power, right? And it's not just a Trump thing, it's really a Biden thing too. So let's start with the presidential power. Why does the president have the pardon power to begin with? Let's just start with the basics here.
Yeah. So, as some people I'm sure are aware, our entire legal system comes from the common law, from our history before we became the United States. And oddly enough, the pardon power was one that was given to the kings of England. And it's kind of one that then transferred over when the colonies were formed and the Constitution was being written. Oddly enough, it was Alexander Hamilton who was the main proponent of it. George Mason was actually the main dissident of it. They had a huge debate over this issue, and Hamilton won out, and thus the broad powers of presidential pardon were granted and enumerated within the Constitution that allows the president to essentially grant clemency, which is either a commutation of a sentence or a pardoning of a conviction, broadly for any federal crime. And I'd like to make sure that that's well known. The presidential pardon power only applies to federal crimes and crimes against the United States, not state level crimes. However, each governor does have pardon powers to usually the same extent or a lesser extent with boards that overlook them. Each state's different. And again, states' rights, you can determine how you want to do that. But the president can broadly just say, hey, I want to give you a pass and you don't have to worry about the legal system going after you anymore. And so all that was put into place in our Constitution. And really the only clarification we've had about limitations on that was in 1974. The Supreme Court basically just held that the power was enumerated in the Constitution, and the only limitations that we can apply would, in fact, be found in the text of the Constitution. And since then, they've basically determined there's not any set limitations that have been spelled out, and that's why we have this situation where presidents are just issuing pardons really without impunity.
Yeah, Joe Biden, it was over 8,000 pardons, which seems to be an abnormally high amount of pardons. What were a lot of those pardons, and then ending with the pardoning of his family? I mean, that seems to be a little bit different than how past presidents have used the pardon power.
Yeah, Biden issued the most amount of pardons of any president ever. And a lot of those were right in the final fiscal year of his presidency, actually. Right on his way out the door, I mentioned this in the piece on the Hill about, giving pardons preemptively to his family and Dr. Anthony Fauci and the retired General Mark Milley, the January 6th committee members, so on and so forth. But about 2,500 pardons were issued in that final month or so for nonviolent drug offenders who were facing sentences that he believed were unduly unfair. And those were for, cocaine, marijuana possession, and commuting those sentences. So either bringing the yearly totals down or outright letting them walk. So a lot of the pardons were granted were in that vein. However, you can go back through. I mean, like you said, there's 8,000 of them. So, I don't want to grossly oversimplify the amounts, but towards the end there, a large swath were drug offenses, nonviolent drug offenses. And, we can date this all the way back. I think Roosevelt, FDR actually was number two when it came to pardons overall. But every president has issued them. It's based upon who they've issued them to and whether or not they've been facing scrutiny for it.
One of the protections that Trump's people have for Trump is both sidesism, right? Like, oh well, Joe Biden did this, so why is that a problem when Donald Trump did it? Though, but I think that January 6th pardons kind of exemplify why that gets stretched beyond believable bounds. How different is the sweeping January 6th pardon versus what some of his president predecessors have done?
Yeah, I don't think we've ever seen pardons of 1,500 people. Is around a little more than that, almost 1,600 total of the January 6th participants who were all pardoned. Of those, over 600 of them were being charged with assault or battery of police officers, whether it be Capitol Police, DC Police, and that's kind of unheard of to be granting pardons to people who are assaulting officers of the law who are just trying to do their job and uphold them. And one officer, in fact, did die from injuries sustained on January 6th. Only one, but that death is still important when looked in the broad context of the amount of pardons. So I think that's why it raises more eyebrows than most other broad pardonings. You can let drug offenders walk, and people can reason with the idea that marijuana possession crimes, excuse you,
Sorry, am
are
I coming through? I didn't mean to. I
yeah,
thought I was muted.
yeah, you're fine. When you grant clemency to a marijuana possession, offender, that's not going to be looked at, I think, the same as someone who has committed assault with a deadly weapon towards a police officer. And I think that's the main distinction here. And both sides are worrying from a legal science from a legal standpoint is that if there's one thing you're always taught when you're going through law school and as an attorney is that the laws are in place to keep society in order. As George Costanza once said on Seinfeld, we live in a society, and that is going to be based upon the deterrent effect of the criminal justice system. So, if people get into their heads that if I just so happen to be on the right side of the aisle or do things in effect that pleases the current president or administration, and I may be granted a pardon, I could see how that could maybe twist some minds to do some things that are less than savory. And on the flip side, I see the Biden pardons, the preemptive pardons of the family members. That's troublesome because now you've set the precedent for any president after you to come in and as they walk out the door to say, hey, my entire friend group, my entire family, everyone's now free and clear of any crimes that they may have committed against the United States. And as Biden did with his son Hunter, named an oddly specific date range of January 1st, 2014 to December 1st, 2024, very specific. So it makes you question, well, what happened during those dates. But it creates the precedent. And that's the one thing I think from a legal standpoint you always are worried about is precedent, because that's how we decide our cases. That's how we make our arguments is we cite previous cases, we cite previous precedent. And all it takes is one instance to basically snowball into something that is currently unfathomable, but will be an unintended consequence for us years down the road.
So, do you think that this could lead to further politically motivated violence? I mean, that seems to me to be one message when you have Stuart Rhodes standing behind the president days after he gets pardoned and he is accused of some pretty serious things. Um, what's the potential fallout of that?
The hope would be is that this is just a one-off event. Of the 600 people who were charged with the assault of police officers or the battery, 169 of them had already pled guilty. So they openly admitted, yes, I either assaulted a police officer, which assault is the action of uh, giving threat towards somebody, and then battery, of course, is the actual touching, the actual act of hitting someone or attacking them. And weapons were used, deadly weapons were being used. And, you know, if you look at this from a broad perspective, Trump had used a lot of language saying that these people were political prisoners. He used terms like hostages, called them warriors, and said that by pardoning them, he was correcting a grave miscarriage of justice or something to that effect. And those type of statements are what concerns me the most. Will that embolden members of the Proud Boys or oath keepers or what have you that would go out and maybe commit more acts similar to January 6th. I don't want to speculate, nor do I hope that never happens again. But based upon the current posturing by the Trump administration, I wouldn't rule it out. But my hope is that this was simply a tip of the cap to the base. He'd been talking about doing this all through his campaign. Now it's done, and in the past, and as we've both seen, Trump's moving at warp speed with executive orders and other things. So maybe this is it was a one-off thing when he comes into the presidency, and now that the slate is clean, he can move on. But it also wouldn't shock me if in the future, something like this, carries out again and he pardons them on his way out the door. But as all Americans, we should all strive to want people to handle themselves with a certain level of decorum. We should want the criminal justice system to be respected. We should let the Department of Justice and prosecutors do their jobs and not have to worry about them being terminated, for example, like the prosecutors and inspector generals who Trump has now terminated for having worked on these cases. Those type of things are concerning from simply, again, a precedent standpoint and from a legal basis where we really should respect our law and order.
I saw a clip yesterday of Ben Shapiro on January 7th, 2021. And I think you'd be really surprised to hear Ben Shapiro say anything close to what he said back then now, because he was comparing it to 9/11. This was just a complete miscarriage of justice, a tragedy, just very over the top language, right? Because we all saw what we saw. And it's interesting 4 or 5 years later how a lot of us have changed our mind about what we saw. I haven't, but what would you say to people who viewed these January 6th protesters? And I want to be clear, like I was in my podcast back then. Like a lot of the people who I think went to these protests, went to the Capitol that day, were like just going for a Tea Party rally. But the guy who showed up with the zip ties had the zip ties for a reason. He didn't get the chance to use them, but if he did, he probably would have. Right. And so I think there's a distinction that needs to be made. And that's what seemed to happen with the Justice Department, where they did their due diligence. But a lot of people feel that they were railroaded. What would you say to people who think of these people as victims of political persecution?
Right. For the people who showed up, I'm with you. I mean, my eyes don't lie. I've worked in law before joining Young Voices and working with youth education and development. I was an attorney. I was a trial lawyer, and I sat in court. I did civil law, but I was occasionally in domestic violence court, so I got to watch proceedings before mine. And if there's one thing I wish people would understand is that when cases are being brought and charges are being brought, they're not being brought without some substantiated evidence. And in criminal law, you need mens rea and culpability. So you need to have the intent. There has to be the mental act of committing a crime, and then there's the actual actus rea, the actual production of the crime. And if you watch the footage and you watch what people are doing, they're breaking into the Capitol building, they're smacking at officers, swinging at them. I mean, there was a noose being rolled down the street. I mean, just stop and look at this for a second and think, what if these people were doing this at your local city hall or doing this at your state capitol or protesting? Does that look like a peaceful gathering, a non-threatening environment? And I would agree. A lot of the people who were part of that crowd probably showed up just to, show support for Donald Trump. They might have believed truly that the election was stolen at the time. And I totally am okay with that. It's your right under the Constitution to protest and to gather. But it's when you start taking that actus rea, that next step where you begin to trespass, you begin to break things, you begin to enter, you begin to threaten, that's no longer a peaceful encounter. And whether or not it's a political motivation or political rally or not, you are committing acts that under the legal definition is assault. You've committed destruction against government property. These are actual crimes. And so whether it's tied to some political rally or not, you have still committed the actus rea of the crime. In the mens rea and your intent, like you said, a man shows up with zip ties. Why do you have those? And now you're committing that as well as trespassing. You can begin to put two and two together. So when prosecutors are building cases, they're not going to bring cases if they don't have something to bring. Trust me, our dockets were overloaded all the time. We don't have time to waste. And especially if you're a prosecutor, you're not making enough to care enough to go be above and beyond what the state is going to ask you to investigate. So for anyone who really doubts that any of that was anything more than some political show that the the powers that be are going after them because they were supporting Trump or whatever. I would just wholeheartedly ask you to stop and think, remove the political bias from it, and just look at the situation and think, if this was happening in any other context, would you be okay with that? And if your answer is yes, I would be okay with this happening as a demonstration against whatever it is you're opposed to, I would then ask you to introspectively ask yourself, am I a good person? Do I truly understand right from wrong? Because breaking into the Capitol building, destroying government property, threatening people's lives, again, a police officer died that day. That's not something that you should be very happy about. And again, I'm not one to stoke the flames. As a true libertarian, I really don't have a dog in the fight between the two political parties, but I do have a dog in the fight when it comes to the rule of law and upholding those truths and justices that I hold to be so evident.
Yeah, I think it's common to call it all revisionist history, but I really do think that people just change their attitude of whether or not this kind of behavior is okay or not. I think you've kind of nailed it there. Like we've just seen a weakening and an eroding of the rule of law. And my final question to you is, uh, you basically have the role of the DOJ and the FBI undermined. I mean, as libertarians, it's not like we're huge fans, but make a pitch for the rule of law. Like for people who go, well, I think they probably should have gone further. Who cares if they messed up the Capitol? Like this, the government needs to be shaken up. Water the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants, that sort of thing, right? But the rule of law is really important for what reason?
To maintain everything that we have built and fought for over these going on 250 years as a nation, everything that we do, and the only reason we have the norms that we have in this country, and we've been able to build our economy and build our markets and trust one another, is based upon uh, that tacit acceptance that we are all bound by the same blindness that is our justice system. And justice is supposed to be blind. I can't say that it is in all your civil cases and criminals. There's certainly injustices in the world, but for the system we have in place, though, there's really not a lot preventing people from doing uh, injustice. I mean, let's just look at some of the cities that are happening out in the West Coast. Like Oakland and San Francisco. Everyone likes to rail on them, but it's true. You see a lot of thefts happening, and there's no repercussions. And as you touched upon, you begin to erode away at those trusts and those things that we all agree to abide by. You lose what is society. You lose what makes, I think, America great. A lot of countries, I think, have justice systems where it's usually some tyrant that puts something in place, and you all just have to kind of hope you're on the right side of it. Whereas here in the United States, you know exactly where you stand. If you're doing nothing wrong, nothing bad will come to you. And if you do commit a crime, well, then you can expect there to be punishments for it. If we don't allow ourselves to go after people and, convict them or, put them through the prosecution and they get convicted, they get sentenced, and they now have to be accountable for their actions. If you remove accountability from the equation, what's preventing anyone from following the rules? And once people realize that, well, why should I follow the rules? Because there's a different set of rules or a different set of justice for a certain subset of people. That's when I think it all begins to really come down. And the last thing we need right now in this country is people to revolt against, the justice system. We already have enough division between us as is with just opinions and thought.
Addison or Hosner, where can people follow you if you want to learn more?
Well, you can mainly just find me on LinkedIn. I would say just follow us at Young Voices. Every now and then I'll put something out, but I mainly stay off the social media echo chambers for my own sanity.
Yeah, that's smart. That's smart.
Yeah.
I've been doing more of that, and it feels a lot better. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and thanks for everything you do over at Young Voices. We really appreciate all your contributors, especially Caleb Franz. What an all-star! Go back and listen to my podcast episode with Caleb. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Chris. Much appreciated.
All right, and thank you so much for joining me here on the Chris Spangle Show, and we'll see you again next week.